Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to join this group. It's great to be back wearing a different hat. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Savitha Moorthy. I am the executive director at the Center for the Study of Childcare Employment at UC Berkeley. I'm still getting used to saying that, so bear with me. In my brief today is to talk to you around some of the really high-level trends around compensation for the early care and education workforce in California. And so what I want to do is to share some really high-level findings from our California workforce study. This is an ongoing study. The latest version of it was published in 2025, and it has data gathered from a sample of around 10,000 educators. So it's across the state, across a variety of settings, including Title 22, Head Start, family child care. And so it's a really robust picture at what's going on at the state level with regards to compensation. I'll also give you my caveat that I've been in my role for only a very short time. Today's day 4, week 4, if like me, you're counting. So I have to say that this workforce study and some of the other studies I'm drawing on today, they are really the remarkable work of my amazing colleagues. In the presentation, I've linked to all the studies that the slides draw from. So when Erica circulates the slides, I hope you'll click through and read the studies that this material comes from. I'm not going to spend a lot of time telling you what our center is, what we do. I only have a few minutes and I want to get to the meat of our presentation. So again, I hope you'll click through and see the studies, see the work we do. So let's get started by saying that California has made a really historic, and I think we can all agree, somewhat of a complicated promise around universal preschool. So the topic today is about the educators who are being asked to deliver on that promise. And the question that I want to be tackling over the next 10 minutes is, how are we serving them right now from a compensation standpoint, and what's the work that remains to be done? The rollout of TK and the implementation of universal pre-kindergarten in California has been fast. And some might argue that it's been too fast and we haven't had a chance to think carefully and comprehensively about the workforce. And essentially where we are right now in the state, the economics of being an early childhood educator don't quite add up. And there are 3 parts to this problem. There's the floor, that the pay is too low to be competitive. There's the ceiling. There's not a whole lot of room to grow and advance. And then there's the gap. Similar work is paid differently by setting. If you look at our workforce study, it has a ton of data and really important points that the data is making. But I wanted to put this kind of narrative frame around the very high-level insights that I want to be sharing with you. So we're going to tackle those 3 points, the floor, the ceiling, and the gap, one by one. But before that, I also want to set a little bit of a historical frame and say that low pay for the early care and education workforce isn't an accident, and that there are overtones of gender and race, inequities around gender and race that are really important to keep in the frame. And basically, what we have today is an inherited system that's long treated care as women's work, and the burden falls hardest on women of color and immigrant women. And if you go on our website, the ECHOS project traces this lineage and decades of educators who've organized for worthy wages, starting with our founder, Marcy Whitebook. So I say this to say that today's crisis has very deep roots, and it's either history is either repeating itself or hasn't really moved. We haven't moved forward very much. So let's talk about the floor. The pay is too low to be competitive. So in 2025, the center lead teachers in California report earning around $23.50 an hour. And this is all self-reported data. And assistant teachers are making around $20. And if you look at starting pay, that's even lower. It's around $21 for a lead teacher and $18 for an assistant, and that's at the low end of the pay range. Let me put that in perspective. California set a $20 minimum wage for fast food workers, but we don't have a comparable wage floor for early educators. That's a problem. And when pay is this low, people can't make ends meet. And so the educators responding to our survey, 31% of lead teachers and 44% of assistant teachers in centers say that they're enrolled in some form of public assistance. So essentially what we're doing is we're subsidizing the early care and education workforce through our social safety net instead of through comprehensive compensation reform. Again, that's a systemic problem. And it's a statewide problem. The ceiling is also a problem because in early education, pay doesn't rise much over the course of a career. A lead teacher in a Title 22 center is earning between $20 and $25 an hour. And that's the whole range from start to finish. Yes, it's a nationwide problem, but my brief was to talk about California. And even in Head Start and Title I programs, the top of the pay range is around $31. And experience and added credentials do not reliably move someone up in the career ladder. So when there's no room to grow, people tend to leave, and turnover among center-based teaching staff runs between 19% and 29% a year. And now part 3 is parity, which is similar work but different pay. A TK teacher in California earns a median of around $90,000 a year, and a center lead teacher caring for the same age children around $50,000, $48,900. And the TK figure is for the school year schedule, while the others are year-round. So if you look at this from an hourly standpoint, the gap is even wider. California has achieved pay parity for TK teachers, but not for state preschool, not for community-based programs, and definitely not for family childcare. And our data also pulls out information for counties. So we have profiles of counties on the website when we have a sufficient number of responses. And so we look at the profile for San Francisco. It is by far the strongest local funding model in the state. That's not surprising to anyone that's in this room. And teachers here are earning above the statewide average. So, in San Francisco, Head Start teachers are reporting median of about $38 an hour. And retention rates are also higher. So we're closer to parity with the TK-12 system in San Francisco, more so than anywhere else in the state. But even in San Francisco, 40% of center teachers report that they're still relying on public assistance. So the local investment that we're making in San Francisco and our city and county, it's definitely moving the needle. But by itself, it's not enough to lift educators out of that economic precarity. And because the decisive levers like reimbursement rates or contract standards, parities, all of these things, they're not within local control. They rest with the state. And for sure, compensation is big. It's, better pay is definitely at the heart of this conversation around equity for the early care and education workforce. But it's not the only thing keeping educators in the field. Benefits matter. So do staffing levels, teaching supports, paid planning time, and whether educators feel like they have real say in how their work is organized. And these working conditions vary a lot from program to program, which means the same raise can land very differently depending on the workplace where it arrives. So when we think about compensation, we have to think about the whole job, not only your hourly or your annual wages. So I'm just saying that to kind of widen the frame a little bit for us. So the compensation gap is a structural issue. It's a historical issue. It's a systemic issue. And local effort is huge, but it's not going to close through local effort alone. And whether the promise of universal preschool holds really depends on whether California as a state and the country as a whole, to Oscar's point, can invest in the people who are delivering it. And the work that you're doing in the UPK mixed delivery plan, there's really important things and really important issues that you're grappling with. And I believe there's an opportunity to name the compensation problem. There's an opportunity to align partners around it and keep it really visible and connect the work that you're doing locally with advocacy efforts at the state, because a lot of these solutions are going to be state level decisions. And it's really important to keep up the pressure so that we can keep up the momentum. And so the question that I want to leave you with today is, what does it look like to use the UPK mixed delivery plan to push on those levers that you don't directly hold?
Okay, so we're going to pass it on to Susan Jeong, Workforce Initiatives Manager at the Department of Early Childhood, and she'll be providing with us an overview of DEC wage support investment and initiatives and some insights. So we'll pass it on to you, Susan.
Thanks so much, Claudia, and thank you all for the invitation to be here. I just want to put a huge caveat that the information being shared today may be very basic for some of you. It's really just a refresher for folks as we're kind of diving into these critical questions that I think Savitha has raised. And so the intention is to give you a strong foundation of what are the wage support programs. And so that's what I'm going to be diving in today. Before going into the specifics of the wage support programs, I wanted to share with you some of the history. I think Savitha even spoke to, prior to 1999, the deep history that we have here in California and nationally about addressing the issue with compensation. But in San Francisco, I think it's critically important to know that we've been at this for over 20 years. And it all started with CARES. And many of you know CARES today as CARES 3.0, but CARES was started actually at the state. And it was in San Francisco where we made the very first local investment back in 1999. And I put Assembly Bill 212 because it was an introduction of legislation that spurred this statewide initiative called CARES. And AB 212 actually supported educators who worked in Title V programs. So these are the California State preschool and general child care programs. And so many of those educators receive stipend to what we know as CARES. And in 1999, there was the formation of the Children and Families First Commission. So we know that affectionately as Prop 10 and First 5. And so it was a big year for compensation in 1999, where CARES was formed as a way to address compensation issues, and it was stipend based. And San Francisco was the very first city and county to invest local funding. This was way before state funds came down from the state. And so I think that's critically important to know that San Francisco has had a long history of caring for its educators and making those local investments. And so then in 2000, CARES was still around, but we also formed Wages Plus. And so if you look at the history of what Wages Plus is, and then in 2010 it merged into C Wages, a lot of the kind of structure of what we see today in what we call ESSG, the Early Educator Salary Support Grant, really came from the inspiration of the history of Wages Plus and C Wages. And I want to recognize that Wages Plus and C Wages, these were transformative structures for the state as well as the nation. And San Francisco has always been kind of a leader in this space of compensation. And it was the most extensive, meaning far reaching, that included family childcare and centers across the country that supported the wages of early educators. And so fast forward, we're in 2022, we've had deep advocacy that led us to a concentrated investment, like major investment, local investment dollars for the formation of what we know today as CARES 3.0 and EESSG. So that's a little history for us. And I think it's important for us to know that it didn't happen overnight, although for many of us, it does feel like that, perhaps. So now we're going to take a closer look at the wage support programs. So we have two modes of wage support. One is CARES, and change the acronym to Compensation and Retention Educator Stipends. And it is CARES 3.0 as we know it today. There were iterations from 1999 and before that, before what we know of as today as CARES 3.0. So CARES is stipend based. So this is individuals who apply and say, I work in an Alpha program, and so therefore I'm eligible. I apply. It's an opt-in program. It is a stipend program that is issued twice a year. So there's two application periods, one in the fall and one in the spring. The stipend checks are sent directly to the educator, and the amounts are broad, and we'll go into specifically how those amounts are determined. But the amounts range from the lowest of $44,000 to upwards of $39,000 per year. And then we have the Early Educator Salary Support Grant, EESSG. This grant is specifically for center-based agencies. So the grant is supporting directly to the agencies. It's given to the agencies to address wages. And so there are quarterly reporting And the base minimum that we require is $28 per hour. And then we have, based on your qualifications, there's a matrix that says if you're a certain level teacher with a certain level of education, it goes up to $39.27 per hour. So the critical differences is one is stipend-based, the other is grant, one is individual, and the other is agency supported. So it's payroll, it's compensation that you see directly in payroll, traditional kind of compensation increases. When we designed the two programs, CARES and ESSG, these are the things that we were thinking of. And there are also still some questions that we are looking at more critically today. What we wanted to ensure was living wage in San Francisco. So the $28 was based on a living wage calculator that we used through MIT. And so that's how the $28 was developed. And we also heard very clearly from family childcare owners and operators that they did not have the administrative support to do the quarterly reporting, to showcase the payroll that's necessary to verify that those wages are being, that the grants are being reflected in those wages. And so that's why we currently still have CARES 3.0. And we also wanted to consider, and we're still raising this question today, is what is enough in terms of being able to address the benefits cliff? So meaning that you should be able to earn enough as an early educator, not have to access public benefit, but not just barely access public benefit, but be able to live comfortably without having to have these public benefit supports. And I think Savitha mentioned that 44% of our educators still remain on public assistance. So that's something that we will continue to look at more closely. In addition, we heard from administrators. So these are administrators of the center-based agencies who said, we also want to consider the indirect classroom support. So compression is one of the issues. So if we raise educator wages, there are other professionals in our field who also support classroom-based learning indirectly. And so that's what ESSG also addresses, is this indirect classroom supports. And then finally, the two programs that we have really are meant to focus on targeted universalism. So specifically those, we say Title V here, but those who are serving a higher number of subsidy eligible families receive a higher bracket of compensation. So that's built in both at the CARES stipend matrix as well as the EESSG stipend matrix. Eligibility. So we have very basic eligibility in terms of educators being able to opt into CARES as well as ESSG. You must be working at an alpha program, and I'll talk about tiers later, but you need to be, we tier you based on the subsidy percentage of subsidy eligible children that your program serves, and that you must be working 20 hours or more per week directly with young children to be eligible for CARES as well as ESSG. And the qualifications that we look at for the different stipend levels as well as the compensation for EESSG are job title, education level, permanent attainment. Those are the things that we look at. So we want to ensure that the educational qualifications reflect the compensation that educator receives. So these are our tiers, and this might get a little confusing for folks, but you'll mainly see the tiering in the CARES matrix. So at the orange tier, which is our quote-unquote lowest tier, these are centers and family childcare providers who serve less than 90% or less of subsidy eligible children. They are eligible to participate in CARES. And those who are at the blue tier are centers and family childcare providers who serve between 20 to 49% of subsidy eligible children. They are also eligible to participate in CARES. The green tier is when it gets different. So the green tier specifically, as it relates to CARES, only for family childcare providers. So those who are owner-operator, those who work for family childcare homes and consider assistants, They may be eligible for a green tier if that site is serving 50% or more of subsidy eligible children. If you are a center and you serve 50% or more, that's when the Early Educator Salary Support Grant comes into effect. That's where all of our centers move over to participate in ESSG. So that is the biggest difference between all the tiering. And the tiering is so that we can ensure that those who are serving the most neediest of our population are also receiving the higher compensation. So in terms of implementation for CARES, this is implemented. CARES is actually implemented by the department, and we offer webinars each round to ensure that educators, and we try to reach as many educators as possible, particularly for those who work at sites that have come on into the Alpha Network as new sites. So we try to reach them and offer webinars to support their application process. Individuals apply through the California Workforce Registry, and it's an online application, and we do processing in-house by the department. We also verify payroll. So that's by way of employment verification as well. So we ensure that educators are employed by way of payroll that's reported to EDD. And we verify that through not only the payroll, but also through the employment verification status on their workforce registry. And then the checks are administered through our fiscal agent. Many of you might be familiar with Children's Council. We partner with Children's Council to issue the stipend checks for CARES. So CARES is individual. It's the educator who must apply directly to the workforce registry, and the employer, which is the Alpha employer, would need to verify their employment. And then with the Early Educator Salary Support Grant, EESSG, we have our administrator, who is Children's Council. They receive all the reporting on a quarterly basis. I see some of our participating agencies here. So we collect quite a bit of information, go deep into the payroll verification as well on a quarterly basis to ensure that the funds being received are being distributed, reflecting the increases that we are expecting for the grant. And so the structure of our grant program is that we provide advances so that administrators are not having to front the money and then get reimbursed. So what the department does is we provide a advance based on estimation of the agencies of like, this is how much we're planning to spend. These are how many staff that we're planning to have for the future, for this year. And so we provide advance and then reconcile on a quarterly basis. The funding is determined between, I don't know what this means, the difference between agency. The funding is, the reconciliation. So that happens on a quarterly basis. There are two categories of employees. So one is considered phase one. Phase one in this instance is a noun, not a verb. So phase one are teachers, those who are working directly in the classroom as educators in the role of educator with young children. And then we have phase two, which are earlier what I had mentioned. These are support roles adjacent to the classroom. So they might be some of your specialists or your home visitors. And so they receive support funding as well based on a very specific formula. For classroom educators, we have a very specific baseline requirement. For the phase two educators, it's based on a formula of number of staff that they have reported through the grant that we kind of divide up as a total to allocate the funds. Some data for you. So this compared to the first year of CARES 3.0 and ESSG and to the second year, we saw a 14% increase. And I thought it'd be great for us to reflect on that was a huge jump for many folks who participated in this program in its first year. We saw that between the first year and second year, we're seeing not only an increase in participation, but also you'll see later, increase in actual compensation efforts as well. So Savitha had mentioned, actually, I don't think she did mention, but we do have this, which is the latest report. I don't know if you all have read through the 80-page summary of the most recent SQL study that we have pushed out. This is the SQL. I'm trying to find the acronym for it. But this is the sequel study that's put out by the Center for the Study of Childcare Employment. We partner with them to understand the work conditions of educators in San Francisco. And it's an hour-long survey that educators need to fill out. And so this is one of our early data points that I wanted to share with you to address. I think Savitha did share this in comparison to the state and to San Francisco. You'll see that San Francisco educators are doing well compared to their Bay Area counterparts as well as California. They're earning at a much higher rate, and their retention levels are also significantly higher as well. So the turnover rate has decreased comparatively to our Bay Area as well as our state counterparts. In terms of who's participated in 24-25, so we're going to the most recent data that we have 1,445 educators who have participated in the Early Educator Salary Support Grant. And a little above that, we have CARES 3.0. 1,730 educators participated in CARES. And I'll go a little more specific in terms of what the boost of compensation looked like for 24-25 of the educators. So the first component that you see here, the 1,445 educators saw an increase in ESSG. If you'll look, majority of our educators are seeing a bump, but the benefited are really for those who are assistant teachers and floaters. And these are actually the significant number of participants in both ESSG as well as CARES. So they are the lowest earners in our field. And so it's nice to see that they're seeing a significant increase in their wages. And similarly, we see in CARES, these are annualized stipends. So as I mentioned, it's assuming that folks at least received at least one CARE stipend. Many do receive 2 CARE stipends, but this is an average based on an annualization. So as you'll see, the highest stipend take home for folks is the assistant teachers, and they're at $13,003. And you'll see those high amounts because if you're familiar with the CARES matrix, the green tier is dedicated to those who are working at a family childcare home. I think that's my last slide. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Susan, for sharing also such good insights and information in a very visual way. So thank you so much. It was very informative. We're going to now pass it on, and we know there's some questions. We are going to open up to Q&A after we complete the presentations. We have our last one for tonight, which is going to be Heather Barondess from San Francisco Unified School District, and we'll be giving an overview also around just to mention your new title, is the Director of Systems Operations of SFUSD for Early Education. And then we'll go over some of the workforce compensation for the Unified School District. So I'll pass it on to you, Heather.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going last and piggybacking on a lot of what Savitha and Susan had shared. I was asked to share a little bit about what the early education positions and compensation looks like here in SFUSD. So this was actually a great exercise for me to learn, and also for some of my colleagues to get all of the information in one place. So thanks for the request. So SFUSD is a Title V provider, the largest Title V provider in the city, although our programs have shrunk considerably due to transitional kindergarten, just like many of the communities. So I just wanted to give an overview as a Title V provider, our infant toddler teacher, our preschool teacher, and then our OST teacher. OST is the district's general child care program funded by CCTR, serving TK and school-age children. All have the same minimum qualifications as they would in any other Title V program. Same with our aides, are the sort of the equivalents to the assistant teacher position. The transitional kindergarten teacher, which of course is part of now the TK-12 system, is required to hold valid multiple subject credential, which is true for K-12 or I guess K-5 teachers, but is also required to hold 24 units of EC or that teacher permits. So it's quite a lift credential-wise for teachers for TK teachers to manage, as well as the entities that hire them. I was asked to comment on the school district's compensation approach, which kind of first and foremost is to follow the contract. All of these teachers listed here on this slide are members of the United Educators of San Francisco, the labor organization that represents all of SFUSD's teachers. And as such, they are part of the negotiated salary ranges. And you can see those salary ranges here. The one asterisk I want to flag is our out of school time, our OST teacher. It's a annual 1.0 salary range, but the position is a 0.5 allocation. So that's kind of the main asterisk to flag. You can see that the citation that Savitha gave earlier, which is that most Title V and Head Start teachers report earning $38 an hour, does fall into this range for our aides, especially. The compensation approach generally is that the more education and the higher credentials you receive, that should be accompanied by higher compensation. And so I think you see that play out here. I'm happy to answer any questions, but that is what I wanted to share.
Thank you, Heather, for stepping in quickly and giving your new role. And so we're going to open it up for questions. I know that there were some already shared in the chat. We'll try to take a look at some of those and bring those up, but feel free to raise your hand and we will call on order so that way we don't have multiple people talking at the same time. And we also have a space for translation to happen. And so we'll open it up for questions that people have for the presentations, and just appreciation for sharing the different lens from the different organizations. It's super valuable to see that all in one setting. So feel free to raise your hand, share any questions you might have, so we can have a little bit of dialogue. All right, we'll pass it on. We have Marlene.
Yes. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Marlene Catuesos. I work for GUI. I am a preschool teacher. Yeah, I am part of the Early Education Salary Support Grant. My question is for Susan, because we're raising our salary 3 years ago. Yeah. It compare our salary right now with the leave of cost, it is nothing. My question is how long I need to wait for increasing our salary?
Marlene, thanks so much for your question. Just as a reminder, what the department sets is a base wage. So we say you must start at a base wage of $28 for all of your educators, whether they work full-time, part-time, for a certain, that's like the lowest kind of educational qualifications that you can meet. And then the highest compensation or highest level of educational qualification would be at 39. It is also a possibility for agencies to also increase wages. They have what we consider compression dollars, so they can also use towards that. And also what we're doing as a department is setting the base wage, and we're helping agencies to come up to that base wage. And agencies can pay above that base wage as well. So I don't know if that's answering your question, but the department is not necessarily an employer, but we do set a standard that says if you are participating in the Early Educator Salary Support Grant, we have identified a base wage that we believe is of quality, of living wage. And so I think if your question is specifically looking at reconsiderations of the base wage, we are currently in that process right now.
Yeah, because I notice now I get a lot of information about how low is our wage here in San Francisco. How you want to using this information for helping to us as a teacher raising our salary? Because you see, San Francisco is expensive life. Yeah, everything, rent, everything. Our salary is very low. You already have that information. But my concern is how you want to use this information, how you want to play to us to help all the San Francisco ECE to helping to us to raising our wage.
We look at that data every day. And we're also looking at, I think our director Mesquita has also spoken to this. We are making plans in terms of trajectory. Like as we're growing the network, as we're growing the field, we're also making investments to ensure that educators have access to those higher educational qualifications. So we are making those kind of estimates in terms of how many more educators will move up and earn that higher wage on the scale that we have we have set. And so we're looking at that all the time. And we are also looking to monitor the living wage and how that's changing for San Francisco. And so that's informing how we make our kind of changes in investment. So I just want to say that we're committed to continue to look at that, and also looking at the 2 wage programs. And I think we are sharing with you that there's 2 different programs that we offer here in San Francisco. So there's a group of educators who receive their compensation by way of salaries, and then we have a group of educators who receive compensation by way of stipends. So the biggest difference, not the only difference, but one of the biggest differences is that the stipend, the taxes are carried by the individual, and the grant, the payroll taxes are carried by the employer. So we look at that every day, Marlene, and I think that's something that we continue to examine. And I think the reason why we're presenting to you the 2 different programs is to also think with you. And this is San Francisco, so a lot of what we built today has been in collaboration with educators and with the community here.
So I hope you're helping to us advocate for us, for our raising our weight.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Marlene, for sharing
Okay,
your
welcome.
comments. Yes. I think there was another question there around just, is there any thoughts of any cost of care studies in the future being developed or assessed?
I don't know if is it for me or is it for Savitha?
I think it could be for both. If there's any studies that anybody is working on or planning
yes.
to around cost of care, what the actual cost of
I
care
don't know if
is.
it's cost of care, but we are looking at a deeper dive into assessing the compensation, all of workforce. So we are partnering. We finally signed the contract. I think it's signed. We are partnering with the Center for the Study of Childcare Employment at UC Berkeley. They will be our partners to evaluate all of our workforce investments, starting from wage support to workforce development and the yet to be developed work conditions efforts. So that will take into account all of the things that we're doing, whether or not our investments are making strides, but can we do things differently? So we'll be partnering with them to take a closer look at all of our workforce programs.
If you see the Susan, the question from John, and I'm assuming it's around the assessment.
Yeah, it's just the SQL survey that we've talked about for over 2 years. And now it's finally, there's going to be some analysis period. Is that going to be a year away, 2 years away, 3 years away for some of the workplace conditions parts? That's what I was referring to. It just feels like we've talked about it for years.
Right. So the SQL survey just came out. So what I was mentioning in terms of our partnership with UC Berkeley, it's something separate and different. But yes, speaking to the SQL survey, it did just come out, and the department is currently in conversation with the family child care cohort of groups. And as you saw in the SQL survey, there was kind of a need for substitute support. And so we're trying to have conversations to understand more about that need. And so we're using that data to inform what the future planning could look like. And we're starting those conversations with the community. And as you know, John, things take a long time to, not only for the community engagement, but it's also the whole procurement and contracting processes too. So we are busily working internally to be able to articulate for you more clearly what the trajectory is for all of the workforce programs, and hopefully it all makes sense. And I don't know exactly when we'll be ready to share with you, but I can tell you that we are busily planning to articulate at least some sort of a vision of, similar to what you all, when I first started, you're like, when is phase 2 happening? I was like, what are these phases? But similarly, to be able to articulate for you the, year 1, year 2, year 3, this is what we're hoping, and for you all to weigh in on what that could potentially look like in terms of implementation. So that is coming. I won't be able to tell you exactly when, but that is certainly coming.
And John, the SQL report that the center worked on, that report was published earlier this month. And then I just dropped the link in the chat.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
And so what Susan's referring to is a next phase of work, which literally kicked off yesterday to think about what comes next and how to evaluate the impact of the workforce investments that DC is making.
What other insights are emerging for the group that you'd like to share in this forum as we consider continued work with the mixed delivery system, or what maybe challenges or opportunities do you feel are emerging? Let's open it up for any other insights. So, Merced.
My name is Merced, and I'm a lead teacher, preschool teacher at Wiyish. So my question is, I'm glad that the results came out, but I read it because I got it like 2 weeks ago. But is my question there that there were, I think, I don't know if there were enough teachers to participate. I believe that there were still a lot of teachers left out on that and that research on that survey. But I'm glad that now they're working through that, collecting data and focus more on salary base for the teachers and get our works get more acknowledgement, because we always feel behind. For years, we felt like we were the babysitters. We're not professionals, but now it's like, I'm happy to see that we're looking more for professional early child developments, and we're looking forward. And I like that DC has planning to also to work more for certain certificates for the teachers. But I wonder if there's a process where they're going to reach more teachers to be involved on that, because like right now, this is the conversation. This is for teachers' salary, but I think it's only a couple of us that we hear as the teachers, because the teachers right now, they're working and they're not in this meeting to hear and to give their feedback and to be heard what they're thinking. So probably in the future, how this information can reach more to the teachers, to greater community, because the teachers are not here. I'm here because I'm part of the UPK, but if not, probably I didn't get the email, or I was not informed. So how we can reach more for the teachers in the future. That's my question. How we can have more teachers here to hear those teachers' voices.
Can I comment on that? Merced, thank you so much. I agree that educators are critical to kind of understanding our current landscape. The department actually did host an educators forum back in January. So we invited all educators, including owners and operators of family childcare homes, to embark on this inquiry of questions that we have for ourselves, which is the two wage support systems and looking at the work conditions. What are the standards that there's a companion piece to the sequel report, which is the model work standard. So it was developed by educators for educators. And so we dove deep into those standards. And so I just want to say out loud that the department is very committed to ensuring that we engage educators as we're looking to look more critically at the current structures we have. And if we're looking to move and shift, that the educator voices are part of that development. So I just wanted to say that I hear you, and I fully agree that educators should be a part of this discussion.
Pass it on to Oscar.
Hello, everyone. I just want to surface something that may be related, but not directly related. The ECE coalition, the San Francisco, I posted earlier. That's some notes from the meeting. Some smaller sites is sharing their challenge right now. Yeah, because of the shifts of the landscape in San Francisco, the UPK, the alpha expansion, all these different things. The families, the private paid families, they are eligible. They need to become part of it now. Otherwise, they will be out of business in a year. So, but then the debate in the operator mind is talking about right now the reimbursement rates, or the ways how they look at it is only cover 60%, or that's their number. I could not verify, but I feel if that's true for some program like that, because of the economic of scale or whatever, that number doesn't make sense. And they say they need to because they are operating in a thin margin, they need to adjust the if they are trying to take care the subsidized families, they are subsidizing, or they need to do the fundraising to make their program sustainable. Otherwise, and then if they need to do that, they will need to adjust the pay of the teachers lower to become part of it. to make the number make sense as a business. So I feel I want to surface that. I think that's something we could think about, or if it's not nobody talk about yet. And they may be also aware of the lower the pay, and then the the CARES 3.0 or ESG will be increasing again, because if they are able to enroll 50% or whatever percentage to meet the green tier or different tier.
Thank you for sharing that, Oscar. I'm not sure if there's any reactions to that from any of the presenters, but I think it was more of a comment or suggestion and something to consider. Thank you, Oscar. We'll pass it to Delia.
Hi, my question is in regards to the CARES 3.0 and with the new process, where's that window instead of doing the year-round receiving of the applications for the providers to apply to be eligible for CARES? I want to hear like what the closure rate was for new providers, because when I started supporting providers 3-4 years ago, there was 20 people waiting on the list to be eligible. So now what does it look like with your new process? And I know you don't note but Hispanic providers are waiting in the waiting period, or African Americans, but what is the closure rate? And where are those people on a list, and who's in charge of that list?
Delia, thanks for your question. I want to try to make sure I clearly understand. You mentioned CARES, but I think you may be referring to the application window to participate in the Alpha network, perhaps?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, and you wanted to know what does the data tell us in terms of closures of sites in comparison to those coming into the network? Is that right?
The number of providers new that are trying to get into Alpha, how many are making it through the process to be eligible for CARES?
I see. Okay. The windows are different. And we've heard also very clearly that that's also one of the issues that folks are feeling. So we don't have that number yet because it hasn't closed, is my understanding. So the application to participate in the Alpha network, that hasn't closed. It did, however, open when the CARES application opened. So we do understand that, and we hear that. And so I can just take your comment back and say that I understand it, but I don't really have a response other than we know the issue, which is that the CARES window for the spring round opened on April 1, and then the application window for Alpha also opened during that period. So I know that some of our folks who have applied to be a part of the network are saying, well, I won't be able to participate in CARES this round. So we've heard that comment, and so I just want to say that we understand it. I don't know if that's helpful, but I just want to let you know that I think I understand the dilemma.
Thank you, Delia. We'll move it on to Jacqueline.
Good afternoon, everybody. So my question is, I was looking at the chart that was shared earlier today about the salary that new educators will get at the school district. But then I also decided to search on the salary that teachers that K to 12 make. And there is a gap, like a big difference. So I'm wondering, how does the school district how are they going to have the money? Like, is it the DEC going to be providing a percentage for them to be able to pay for those educators? And why is it also, but then also why is it that educators in centers and family childcares, even if they have educations, a B8 on early child education and things like that, do not make not even half of that money that is being shown right now?
I can respond about the first part of your question, Jacqueline, which is, does DEC fund the school district's early educators? And Susan, correct me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding is that the answer is no, that DEC does not fund the school's district, that the district early educators are not eligible for EESSG because the rate of pay is already higher than many of the other organizations in the city. So that answer is no. I cannot answer the other part of your question, Jacqueline.
I just feel that the way that it's being portrayed right now, in a sense, the people who are working in centers and in family childcares most likely are going to end up moving to work to the school district. And what's going to happen with us? We're losing already the kids. Educators are not staying long enough with us. So it's like, what is the main goal in here? It's like, that's my concern.
If I might weigh in with a comment. And Jacqueline, this is not going to be a very satisfying comment, but I also want to just, this is where I think the state level picture is really important. We're seeing a lot of local investment, like based on our data, I can tell you that there's a tremendous amount of local investment in San Francisco, much more so than in any of the other 57 counties in California. Some of the issues we're seeing, some of the inequities we're seeing are the results of a fragmented ecosystem in early care and education. We don't have publicly funded comprehensive childcare in the same way that we have publicly funded TK to 12. Because of that, we don't have that at the national level, we don't have it at the state level. And then because of that, we don't have certain things, like a wage floor across the state for all early childhood educators that's that's irrespective of the different setting they're in, because otherwise what we're seeing is a lot of differences in what teachers, early childhood educators make depending on the setting that they're in. And so even between Title 22 and Title 5, there's a pretty big difference. And that's, not acceptable, frankly. And so this, I think, comes back to the point that Erica started earlier, when it comes to things like wage floor, when it comes to things like parity with TK-12, those are really levers that sit at the state level. And we really have to think as a community of educators, we have to think about advocacy at the state level, because that's where we can see movement on some of the things that you're talking about. So, I understand that what I'm offering is an unsatisfying response, but it's also where change can happen. And so if you look at the May revise, for example, it's a budget that actually does how's the word? It's a budget that actually rolls back some of the protections for the early care and education workforce in a really significant way. And even though the rhetoric is different, I believe that, and this is me speaking, not CSCC, because I'm not allowed to do lobbying or advocacy as a UC Berkeley staff member. But so this is just Savitha speaking as a person, as a private citizen. So I feel like that budget is actually misaligned with the rhetoric that the governor has had all along around supporting the early care and education, supporting children, families, and educators. So I feel like this is an opportunity. We have to call and hold people accountable. And so it's not satisfying, but I feel like some of these decision points sit at the state level.
Great. Thank you for those comments. Thank you also for bringing your contributions to the conversation. We're going to have our last comment or question for Vanessa as we move into the final stages of our time together. So
hi there.
Yeah.
Hey. So thanks so much for organizing this and including parents of public schools of San Francisco in the conversation. To the point around state advocacy, I think that some of the tension points is we've been waiting so long to get where we know we need to be, and then seeing the governor's budget, it feels like a setback. So how or what is being done to kind of form a coalition to get up into the state to advocate and really get to the change that is needed? Because, to the point of exodus for San Francisco, San Francisco, as it becomes more wealthier, if we are not providing these wages and protections, we will not have a diverse workforce. And that, in our opinion, is a big problem on a couple levels. So what is being done, and if we're not there yet, how can we begin that conversation and work together to get to the state across different segments in education, not only early childcare, because K-12 can support early childcare and advocating. So what's happening there, if anything? And thanks again for having us.
Thank you for that comment. And then I don't know if Heather, you have any awareness or anybody in the group of anything that's happening state level or from Unified School District or any other?
I think that I can chime in now, and I think it is a good segue for our next segment of our conversation, that this UPK in California is a great opportunity for us to build that bridge, right, between the early care and education and the TK to 12 system, that before we were even more isolated. Don't get me wrong, we are not so integrated yet, but there are efforts, PK3 and others that came before this TK. But now we see, even with this effort here, let's be clear, this is funded. This work group meeting, this effort of UPK mixed delivery is funded by the California Department of Education through a grant to enhance and improve the implementation of TK. Right? That was a demand that was raised many years ago, if not decades, by advocates to have a system to include, like Savitha was saying, to include more ECE programs as part of the public education system. Don't get me wrong, there are many other interests behind this to have TK as part of the school district. But let's say that now we have one grade or 1 year of early education that's part of the public education system, where you have the educators having a higher salary, and then we need to bring along everybody else, right? So I think that this UPK effort is one example of how we can build that bridge. So that said, there are many coalitions working at the state level. In the ECE or early care and education field, you have the ECE coalition. Many organizations are members of that, and the organizations involve their constituency, their communities, their network in advocacy days and advocacy efforts throughout the year, right? So now, as Savitha mentioned and others mentioned, it's a crucial time for us to voice our opinion and to pressure our elected officials to not adopt the budget that is in front of us right now, that is affecting not only ECE, but education in general. As an example of how this bridge is being done now, as part of the Child Care Planning and Advisory Council, we are looking at the state budget, not only the ECE part of it, but we are looking at the out of school time part of it. We are looking at TK part of it. We have other allies looking at education in general, right? But we are now expanding our perspective and say, hey, we need to look at the out of school time because our TK, our ECE students are there in the school district. We are having conversation with board members at the school district. And so despite the fact that the compensation of educators in general and ECE educators more specifically, as Savitha opened her remarks saying that it's a systemic historical problem that is rooted in racism and discrimination against women. And we are changing slowly but truly, but we are not going to solve everything in this generation in our lifetime, but we can make efforts to change for future generations. We can try our best to get the maximum we can at the local level, state level, federal level, and global level, because this is not only a problem of United States, let's be clear, right? This is a worldwide problem. We see reports in Australia and many other countries where ECE teachers are struggling and fighting for their rights. So we are not alone in that. But that said, it's a matter of priorities. Public decisions or any decisions in life, it's a matter of priorities. So we need to get our priorities straight at the local level, our elected officials, at the state level and the national level. And that's why elections matter, right? So we need to vote. Elections coming up here. Alex, if you can share your voter guide of the ECE coalition here in the chat, please do so. So we need to elect officials that are aligned with our priorities, that value educators at all positions, right? Because the elections matter in any position. And despite the fact that San Francisco is one of the best counties in California for educator compensation, as we saw with Susan's presentation, to highlight how, because we pass, and thank you to everyone gave it before here, and some of them are here. Oscar, Maria, Luz, and others. We have Baby Prop C that passed. That was a tax measure in our ballot. And that was a lot of work to pass that, decades of work. And then now we have these funds that we need to protect too. So our rights and our accomplishments in this area, we cannot take for granted. We need to protect. We need to be at the budget hearings. We need to make sure that these funds are allocated in the right way. But we also need to continue to advocate not only at the local level, at the state and federal level. So that said, this Child Care Planning Advisory Council has a policy platform, and it has also, this work group has an equity action plan, right? That's basically a platform of what our priorities for this year and what we should be focusing on. So our role here as part of this discussion and this body, we are one of the 56 local planning councils in California that's focused on childcare. And that network is very powerful. It can be more powerful, but everything starts locally, right? So I'm going to share my screen just to show you what our platform say in terms of compensation of educators. The discussion, we would love your input, and is this. So this work group, we have members from different stakeholders in the UPK mixed delivery system. And we already have a platform that we created with input from many people. But as I go over this platform, please share here or in the chat, or we can even raise your hands at the end here. It's going to take me 5 minutes maximum. One idea, challenge, opportunity related to educator compensation that you'd like this work group to continue exploring and advocating, right? So we know in general it's a crisis and etc. But is there anything that you see that we can change beyond what's already outlined here, right? So here you can see in our policy platform, we have workforce compensation, working conditions, and career pathways. And today we are talking about compensation primarily, right? So here we have strength compensation benefits and working conditions for not only early educators, but out of the school time workforce. And then we have investing in workforce development and retention. And we have integrate educator agency through shared decision-making structures that shape workplace policies and daily practices and expand access to mental health support, coach, and peer networks. So these are the three top. At this point, this process, we heard a lot of, to create this platform, we heard a lot of comments, and there is a more extensive document with more details about this, but these are the priorities, general priorities, right? And the UPK Mixed Delivery Work Group, we have as one of our main goals is support early educators with fair pay and sustainable careers. As we see here, like with the discussion, it's complicated, it's a complex process, and we cannot change from one day to another. But our priorities for this year is to focus on adopt wage and benefits parity benchmarks across city-funded programs. That's one of our priority for this for compensation, right? And of course, improve compensation and working conditions citywide. So this is what we have as part of the workforce compensation, as part of the CPAC and this work group. So my question to you is, beyond what we already talked about, the state budget, we need to fight for the state budget for a rate reform, for EC providers, for the way they pay to be on enrollment, not attendance, and all these things. But is there anything else that this work group should be focused on? And that's the question that we're discussing now, right? So is there anything, any one idea, challenge, opportunity related to educator compensation that you'd like this work group to continue or to start to explore? Any creative ideas, anything that you think that perhaps DC, we know that there are many things that we can do better, but there is time to improve. But is there anything that you'd like to bring to this group that, hey, it's not in our platform, and I want you to focus on this? So this is an open question. We are not going to break out in small groups. This is an open question, so you can put in the chat or raise here. And Sarah, as a representative of an organization that works with educators, and I know that you have been hosting as part of the EC Coalition some listening sessions. Is there anything that comes to mind that we didn't talk here today that we should put on our agenda or an opportunity for advocacy that's a lower hanging fruit that we can make a difference in this area.
I appreciate you calling me out there. We're talking to very different groups out there, and some of the people we're talking with are teachers across multiple site types, Title 22, Title 5. And so I just dropped a comment about that. One of the questions we've been asking is, did you feel that pay raise? How does that feel? And with it being 3 years, 4 years later now, they're like, well, it was great when we got it, and now we're waiting for a next step. So that conversation, I think, has already been there. The other thing, though, was this lack of transparency, this confusion with it, is we can't really tell what our wage is. So I am interested in making some of the charts and scales that we saw today across EESG and CARES more visible to educators and site leaders who are trying to make these decisions and make their budgets work, and, to make them really be able to see and consider hourly work, is it 185 days, or, the differences that people work in the different sectors. I think one of our difficulties and confusions is we're holding educators across so many site types, so many with all our different funding streams. So we just had, I was going to say 3, but it was really 2 different presentations focused on different site types and the different way we pay educators. And when you go out and talk to a teacher, they're like, I'm not sure I prefer EESG to CARES. I can't tell what I really get. And if there was a way to make that more visible, I think that would be interesting. We also polled, as the coalition, the Early Care San Francisco EC Advocacy Coalition, we held a listening session around Alpha and getting into Alpha and the difficulties of Alpha. And there was just a lot of tripping there of we want to go into it, and Oscar already raised this, but the reimbursement level is less than the fee-based pay. So fee-based sites are in a different place than other sites in this picture, and both are being impacted by both Title V entities that are currently part of Alpha are being impacted by TK and by the raise to 200%. Families that were happily paying fees are now not. Now, I want a universal childcare system. So I want parents to be able to access sites for free, but we have to think how it's impacting all the different sectors, and it's complicated. So a comprehensive look at each sector and how they're being impacted. And then just lastly, each of these decisions are spending money. And even though we have, those of you who have been paying attention to that discussions at City Hall about the, Prop C dollars that were collected, it's a finite amount of money. So I really do appreciate you bringing up that decisions, we have to look at the state level too. We have to know that that's a finite amount of money. But I really appreciate today's conversation having a lens on educator compensation and recognition that it really hasn't changed. We did a wonderful thing like 2022 and it's 2026 now. And what's the next step? And let's be careful about spending all this money in all these ways if we're not taking care of one of our initial goals, wage parity with SFUSD, and if we're not making sure dollars are coming in for that. Let's just be mindful of that.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. I think that the transparency of the wage across different providers in different sectors of our EC system, perhaps that could be part of our needs assessment, right? Like we can have that report, include that, and then we can use as educational tool. That just putting out there that could be something that we can create together. Or if it's created even before, we can put a link to it at least, right? So great. The healthcare retirement benefits, something that teachers, educators want to be more affordable. Thanks, Oscar. There was a conversation also about CCPU, the Child Care Providers United. They have a healthcare fund, and then there is how can we make perhaps that kind of model locally, or is there any creative way that we can do that? Is there any conversation, or is anyone having more information about CCPU Health Fund, or how is it working? as part of the compensation system for family childcare providers and friend, families, and neighbors too. Any insight on that, Oscar or Susan?
For the CCPU retirement and healthcare, you need to take care the state subsidy to be qualified, and then there's only so many state subsidy children in San Francisco. So yeah, if you are lucky enough to have that voucher, then you are part of it. If you are not, then you are not part of it. So the how the healthcare fund looks like is that if you are eligible, you can submit the insurance payment that you pay, and then they reimburse. That's their structure. And the retirement, they calculate your years based on it's still based on the record they find on how many subsidies families you serve and how many years, and then multiply by a ratio.
That's right. That's right.
Can
Yeah.
I add to that? So I think Oscar brings up a really good point, which are like in order to be eligible for CCPU, you must enroll state subsidy children. And so we have local subsidies here. So I don't know what the incentive rate might be for that. This is not a San Francisco issue. We have emerging other kind of local funds in our neighboring Alameda County and others who will also be offering local subsidies. And so I think this is the theme of today. It feels like, it's a statewide issue. It's much bigger than our 7x7 region. So I think it's important to raise those questions directly to CCPU and those who are advocating to kind of keep those funds. And I think it's critically important to keep those funds as well. Just to kind of also piggyback on what Oscar was sharing, that those funds are directly for owners and operators of family childcare homes. They don't trickle down to family childcare assistants. And so we have quite a bit of family childcare assistants who are also participating in the wage support programs that DEC funds. And so that's also something for this group to consider as well, that while the owner and operator could potentially access those benefits are not trickling down, at least not right now, to their assistants.
So to close this conversation, I'm wondering, Savitha, you as now at an organization that is really doing many studies and is connected with other similar organizations around the country and perhaps around the world that are really looking at workforce in our field. Do you see out there beyond California, beyond San Francisco, anything that is creative or that is more innovative than we can be at this point, right? That perhaps is something that we should be considering adopting in San Francisco or even California, or we are the ones. How do you see it?
Way to put me on the spot on day 4, week 4. I see the challenge, and I'll raise you I'll raise you a website. I'm gonna put a link in the chat to an area on our website. But to answer your question, the Center for the Study of Childcare Employment is actually doing a lot of studies and and technical assistance for all kinds of bodies that are looking at ECE compensation. So we're working in New Mexico, for example, and doing evaluation and technical assistance around the workforce compensation initiatives they have in place. We also have on our website a compensation tracker. The question you asked is really big and hard for me to answer quickly. But if you go here, and I'm going to share my screen for just a second. This is the link that I just shared in the chat. And if you go here, you can see this has all our resources around compensation. And you can see there's an interactive US map of median wages for early care educators. You can see a compensation tracker. We have one of my colleagues facilitates a compensation capacity building community of practice that has like the Colorado Department of Education as a part of it, as the Tarrant County in Texas, and, people from Illinois. So there's a lot of people and there's a lot of momentum around thinking about educator compensation. And so if you look here, there are a variety of ideas and, initiatives that people are implementing. And so I'll just leave it there and invite people to take a look. I don't know, to answer your question, that there is like one specific thing that's like the most innovative thing necessarily, because a lot of this is context dependent. One thing that I've heard from our colleagues in New Mexico is that the work is very incremental. I mean, they have universal childcare in Mexico. It's New Mexico. It's a very different context than California, especially we are the fourth largest economy in the world. We have a different population than New Mexico does. And even in New Mexico, where they have far fewer children than California does, the work has been really, really incremental. And sometimes it feels like turning around an ocean liner in the Suez Canal because you have to do it very few degrees at a time. And it feels like there's not much movement. But that is one thing we hear from a lot of colleagues. And in a side conversation with one of the audience members here, we talked about how, Anthropic built its AI model in far less time. So I think there's also then it's taking for us to bring equity to EC compensation. So I think there's a bigger question for us as a field to grapple with and, just elevate this issue outside of our our ecosystem and the people that we're talking to.
Thank you. Claudia, with your permission, I want to thank Savitha, Susan, and Heather for joining us today and sharing some information. You may think that people already know, we already know the information, but it's always good for us not only to hear again or to hear for the first time, but to see it connected, right? I think that the conversation about transparency and to have this bigger view or broader view of different compensation, different settings is something that we take from here to forward. Embrace. I'm looking forward to working with you, Sarah, and other EC Coalition members in making that happen. Thanks for all the work group members that are here today. If you can just answer these basic questions, how events go, just to share with us if the discussion was relevant, if the time was well managed, if the topics were interesting, and if overall you enjoy. And if you have greater clarity about efforts to enhance educator compensation in San Francisco, and please share any comments or questions, ideas, and others that you may have. And please stay engaged. We have an EC coalition in San Francisco that is Alex is the representative, Sarah is a member, Maria Luz, Parent Voices, and other organizations are members. June 11th is the public hearing about the Department of Education or Early Childhood budget. So that's the local level. We have many opportunities for you to stay involved. I will be sending information about our ledge and public policy work group meetings. That's where their actions on advocacy are discussed. And of course, we always have our general meetings on the second Wednesday of the month, 9:30 to 11:30. With that, I'll pass back to Claudia to close us out.
Thank
Thank
for
you.
providing the feedback. Yeah, and asking for that. And I don't want to take much more time. I think you covered most of the items. And just again, appreciation for everybody showing up, contributing to this conversation. And, as next steps for us, this is helpful for the steering committee to take all of this back and support some of the, to guide what we do next. So we will take this information to help inform our next steps. And so we hope to see you all in the August 27, I think, session that we'll be having. And more information will be sent out. But again, thank you for dedicating 2 hours for this. We hope it was informative, but then at the same time, it will help inform us on some actions for the work group. So thank you, everyone, and have a great night.